Hi, my name is Martin Perhiniak. This is the 11th episode of the digital art series here on PSD Tuts Plus. Today, we are going to talk about techniques that we already discussed in previous tutorials, like using perspective, sketching, and shading objects. If you watched the previous episode, there we created some thumbnails for this project. So basically, I came up with a couple of ideas for a spaceship concept, and today we are going to continue from that point, and I've selected one of the thumbnail sketches from the previous episode, which you can see here on the left side. And from that sketch, we are going to create the drawing, which you can see on the right. It won't take long because I recorded the whole drawing, and I will show you a fast version of it. But it won't be too fast, so you will be able to see everything, and I will tell you always what I'm doing. In real time, this sketch took me roughly around an hour, and of course if you spend more time with sketches, it can be also much more detailed. But for exploration and ideas, I think to learn this technique that I'm going to show today is really useful. And again, just like with everything, it's all about practice. So don't expect for the first time to make a brilliant sketch. Even my sketch, I'm not really keen on this sketch. It's not bad, but it's definitely there are some much better sketches and spaceship concepts out there. I think you should never compare yourself to the greatest artists. You should always work hard and try to get recognized. So always compare your artwork to your previous art. So let's say you do a sketch, and then next time compare the second one to the first one. There will be always place for improvement, and you will always see how you improve your skills. Try to always learn from each of your sketches. But the most important thing is to remember it's all about practice. So try to spend as much time as possible with drawing and Photoshop or even on the paper, and that will help you to become a real digital artist. So let's get started. Here are the first lines that I need for this sketch. This is the perspective. So I don't need the vanishing point. I just roughly have these lines leading up to the vanishing point. Okay, and I'm going to start drawing using these vanishing lines or these construction lines, and first start with the wings. And I would be able to do the perspective more precisely, but I don't want to spend too much time on it. I want to keep it rough at this stage. So it's still just an idea. I would like to see how it looks, and if I like the shape and if I'm happy with the whole composition, then probably I would draw the whole thing again from scratch and just make sure that the perspective is perfect and everything is there. I might even decide to do another view of the same concept. But at this time, I'm just quickly working on these sketch and working with the lines to define the shape. Obviously, I can always alter it from the thumbnail that we have on the left, which is just a guide. It's nothing that I have to always follow exactly. So it just helps me to start working with something. And now I have the basic lines, so I can draw the shadow on the spaceship. At this stage, the shadow looks like that the shadow is directly below the spaceship. So that means the spaceship is on land, so it's not flying. But later on, I will probably change that. And I'm using one layer, another layer for the vanishing lines, but apart from that, I'm working on one layer. I don't want to make it difficult, so I keep everything on one layer. And because this is a sketch, I don't want to spend again too much time on making everything non-destructive, because I would like to make rough changes at this stage. As you can see, I turned the opacity down, and this is another layer actually that I'm working on now. This is just to clean up the lines, and I will probably get rid of the other layer, the original sketch. So after I had the rough lines, rough construction lines, I created another layer and I worked up this next level. So you can see if I turn it on and off, you can see before and after. And I still keep the sketchy layer on while I fill in the shadows. So I use a bigger brush and I just quickly sketch in the shadow below the spaceship, and that shadow obviously will help me to define the source of the light as well. Will be probably on the top, so this will be lit from above this object, the spaceship. And I also would like to define more lines. As you can see on the wings, I already have a couple of lines, and on the spaceship as well, just to define the form even better. And now I'm going to use the gray color as my base color. So I quickly filled in the whole spaceship with that color. And again, it can be on the same layer as your construction lines. And once you're ready with that, you can start using again your brush, but with a white color, and just change the opacity. Usually I use pure white, but I change the opacity of the brush down to 5% or 10%. And I change always between black and white. So I use black for shadows and white for highlights. And you can see I already started to create these highlights and shadows. And I try to define the object with the light. As we've learned that in previous episodes, I try to have that 1, 2, 3 read. So different lighting or different light values on the top, on the left, and on the right. So this is what I'm working on. I'm now using the mixer brush tool to just wash out some of these strong construction lines. So the mixer brush is just simply drawing over the lines that you already have. It's washing together the details. And a mixer brush tool can be also used for drawing. So as you can see, I just get rid of those very strong construction lines. And I also use the mixer brush to have that speed lines behind the spaceship. And that's the main thing why I'm going to change the shadow at the bottom, because here I decided to have the spaceship flying and going very fast. So for that I will probably need to change the shadow. Okay, so as you can see, I'm working on the shadow now, but I will probably get rid of it soon. I go back and work more on the wings at this point, and I try to define a more interesting shape. So I don't want to have it flat. I definitely want to somehow show that this is a nice rounded shape, like a shield, and it has these highlights and shadows. Once again, I'm just using the brush tool with white and black, and I'm defining the edges, and I'm defining the darkest points, going over and over again the whole spaceship. Try not to stick to one specific part on your sketch. Try to always work globally and work it up step by step, but globally on the whole spaceship. Here I'm again using the mixer brush tool, again mixing a bit the colors together, and I'm starting to see the 3 dimensions on this object, but still I have to work on the details. So here again I'm working on the construction lines or the edges, which are still a bit too dark for me, so I'm trying to get rid of that. And now I'm cleaning up the lines and the shadow. And I will make the shadow darker as well. Here I'm still thinking of keeping the shadow just directly below the object, but will be better once I move the shadow a bit further away. So I'm adding some more speed lights. Again, with the mixer brush tool, you just simply select the mixer brush tool and just draw over the object to create those lines. At this point I'm using the burn tool, and I just darkened some of the details, the shadow details. And now I switch back to the brush tool, and I'm adding pure black to the shadow. So I want to have a strong contrast between the shadow and the object. That's why I'm using this dark black for the shadow. And you can see that it helped me to define the depth in the drawing. So it's always good to have a strong contrast whenever you're creating sketches. Okay, here I'm not convinced by the shadow, so I'm going to remove it. You can see I didn't edit the recording, so it's like exactly the same way as I was working on it, but faster. I think it's 4 times faster than real time. So now I'm defining the shadow, and I'm using these construction lines to help me a bit with the defining the shadow. So I try to draw the shadow on the surface. Let's say that's the surface level, and at the back I'm also trying to draw the shadow of that tail part. And again I'm using the brush tool with black once again to have that contrast. I'm using a bigger brush size, drawing over these parts, something like that. Again, this is not accurate shadow. I can, now that I watch this whole recording again, I can see that I would change a couple of things, like the tail should be more down, but this is all part of the learning. I'm still learning all the time whenever I create a new sketch. So it's always good to start drawing something, then leave it for a bit, go back, and you, with a fresh eye, you will always see some mistakes and problems. Now this is a really important part. I'm using a very thin brush, and as you can see I'm drawing on the wing now, drawing these lines, these very thin and transparent lines, to give me more definition on the shape. And I was drawing over the wings as well, so you can see the spaceship itself, and these little lines can really help to show the details and show the forms of the spaceship. And remember to use highlights and shadows also to define the three-dimensional form. So as you can see, I'm adding more and more detail on the body of the spaceship and also the wings. I'm working on the top part now, and I'm working on the guns in front. Now I'm working up the tail. If you look at the tail part, I'm adding a couple of lines there, and I'm going to work a bit on the edges as well. And we are almost done. Here I decided to add a bit of detail. I'm adding these numbers on the side of the plane, and a little icon or logo or something like that. And I'm continue adding these lines, these sketchy lines defining the shape. And I'm also using the eraser tool. Remember from a previous episode, erasing out from the object is a really great way to add some interesting elements and parts. So by removing those two little pieces, I made it a bit more interesting. Okay, I'm still working on these lines on the spaceship and defining a bit better the wings, the edges. As you can see, again, I'm working on the edges using the mixer brush tool again a bit, just to blend together some details. And we are almost there. I'm working here a bit on the wing, just cleaning up the edge, making it nice and round. Now I'm getting rid of the construction lines and I'm cleaning up the shadows as well. Again, I'm working globally, so I'm always going through the whole image like a scanner with my eye, and I'm looking for details that I can work and make better. And that's it. That's the final sketch. And as I said, it took me roughly an hour, but if you want, from this point on, you can create a final rendering if you spend a couple of more hours on it, and you can even create the environment. But I highly recommend, if you've never done sketches like this before, and I highly recommend to, instead of working it further, try to create at least 10 sketches like this before you go further with your technique. So this is a really important part of the digital art, sketching up objects, and we will talk about sketching up humans as well. So this is mainly if you create objects, weapons, vehicles, spaceships. So if you learn this, you basically practice the most important elements, like using a perspective, using vanishing points, using the sketching technique, and using shading. So altogether, these three things that we learned in previous episodes combined in this technique, and that's what makes it really valuable. So try to practice this as much as you can, and you'll see that you can improve really quickly whenever you create a new sketch or concept. And also remember, before you start creating a sketch like this in perspective, try to first create those little thumbnails from side view or front view of the object that you would like to draw, because that helps you to get started and have a rough idea before you get into perspective. Okay, so that's all for today, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And next week we are going to continue practicing the techniques that we already learned, but we will use them for another interesting project. Thanks a lot for your attention, and see you next week.